Hello and a very warm welcome from Frankfurt's main tower. This is Thomas Koos from Helaba, and I have Matthias Mems with me, head of our DCM and Syndicate.
Hi, Thomas.
Hey, good to see you. We have a pretty hectic year 2024 behind us, but unfortunately not as much activity as we would have wished in our favorite segment. Having said that, the overall euro market has been super active. 1,700 billion euros of total issuance in that market, and 90% of that, well, 88 to be exact, in the currency in euros. That's a pretty good figure. That, however, was not all covered. FIG, as the subsector, only had about 540 billion, of which covers made up 170 billion. Well, you could say that is not a great number, but compared to the overall scheme of things, it's okay. Just looks a bit pale in comparison to 22 and 23. But we hope things will change next year. Anyway, the other segments, of course, have been also pretty busy. SSA was the star runner of the show. Overall, 750 billion. SSA, the way we define it, i.e. sub-sovereigns, supras and agencies. The overall government market, of course, was a lot bigger. But let's not waste too much time on that. Let's go directly into what's our most interest. Let's see how primary markets in covered did develop in 24. Matze.
Yeah, Thomas. We've had an issuance volume of roughly 160 billion. That was, in comparison to the years before, around 40 billion lower. And the reason for that was relatively simple to explain. While we were on track for the first 4 months of the year, we have seen a little bit of deterioration of issuance conditions in covered bonds, especially after the call for snap election in France. We have seen investors that were not so excited to buy covereds, and in the second half of the year we have seen a bond swap spread, which was the first time ever in negative territory.
Yep, remember that.
Which drove covered bond spreads, first SSA and then covered bond spreads, to a wider level, and which made SSA much more attractive than covereds. So you can see especially that after the summer break and after September issuance volume, there was only low issuance activity from October on for the rest of the year.
Yeah. This part was where it was still fun.
Yeah, yes, exactly.
Okay, but there was still a lot of issues. So which markets were the most important ones?
Yeah, I would say as nearly as every year, we have seen the highest issuing volume with 40 billion from French issuers, followed by German issuers, that have issued around 30 billion. Canada was, like nearly every year in the last years, on rank number 3 with an issuance volume of roughly 13 billion. Interesting thing to remark is that Italian issuers have issued nearly 10 billion in euro-denominated covered bonds, and Singaporean issuers were very active in the market with close to 5 billion.
Hey, come on, that pales if you look at one Canadian issuer doing 10 billion in 2 shots. Okay, but let's look at the other segments. What about senior pref?
Yeah, in senior pref, we have had an issuance volume of 80 billion. That is down in comparison to last year, in line more or less with the years before. Senior pref were characterized especially by the issuance activity of Spanish and Italian issuers, which both count for roughly 12 billion euros, and followed by the French of roughly 10 billion euros.
And why is that falling so strongly? I mean, this is even worse than in covereds.
So it is only one side of the medal. When we look at senior non-pref, what we maybe should do now. You see that we have a record year with over 110 billion euros in issuance. We have had fantastic issuance conditions. On the other hand, we have to notice that a lot of issuance activity were regulatory driven for MREL and TLAC purposes. So that we have had a record year here. And when you look at the distribution to single countries, it is not so much a single country which is on rank number 1. It's more a bunch of countries. Everybody, not everybody, but we have a lot of countries that have issuance activity between 10 and 15 billion euros.
So this is one explanation of the record-breaking overall volume in the euro market this year, despite covereds and senior prefs going down. Yeah. So what's the other part?
The other part is SSA. I would say, as in the years before, here with the dominant issuer, European Union. You have mentioned that before, that we have seen syndicate deals of roughly 80 billion euros. When you also take the auctions in consideration and private placement, EU issuance count for nearly more than 1/3 of overall SSA issuance activity.
And it's including, if you include EIB and EFSF, it's actually 1/3 of all SSAs, but it's almost 10% of the total euro market.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's quite a lot.
So, and let me just mention German lenders, which had issues 50 billion last year, which were nearly 30% more than in 23, where they were only active and issued 38 billion.
All right. Now, let's look at the individual segments a little bit more in detail.
Okay.
Starts with covered.
Here you can see the activities for covered bonds. You can see, I think the most remarkable thing is that we have a sweet spot somewhere between 5 and 7 years. The 7 years...
Just 1 second. When you look at this directly, this looks familiar. If I look back at the last half year or so, that's what I would have thought. Short maturities. Nothing really going much beyond 5 years. That's a bit surprising. Why is that?
So that mirrors exactly the issuance activity in 24, where we have a divided year with a very good start for the first 4 months, very active, very perceptive markets, and longer tenors, and then the deterioration of the issuance conditions around the summer and after the summer, which more focus on shorter maturities.
Okay, doc. What does it say for the senior market?
Yeah, when we look at senior pref, you see a little bit the overall good issuance conditions. We have book sizes around 2 billion euros. You see bid to cover ratios, which are somewhere above 2 on average, especially with a strong focus on the first half of the year. And overall, you can say, especially in the senior market, in both senior pref and senior non-pref segments, very good investor demand the whole year.
This bit doesn't seem to come up, huh? We had that in the last few updates as well. Everybody's talking about ESG, but we just don't see that coming in the bond market, on the FIG side at least. Corporate's a different story, I think, as people expected. Why do you think that is?
So as you can see, we are on average around 25% of the issuance activity in senior pref was ESG related. I think that is building up, and I also think that it mirrors a little bit the investor demand, that they are not looking so much on single issuance, but more as the whole issue, that the whole issue is ESG compliant and has a good ESG rating.
Makes sense. But this is the boring part anyway. Let's look at the exciting one.
The more interesting part, and where we have seen much more issuance activities, the non-pref segment. You see especially book sizes between 2 and 3 billion, very good book to cover ratios, around 2.5 on average for the whole year. The figures for the fourth quarter are a little bit down, but that just mirrors the lower issuance activity, which you also can see that with 1.8 deals per week, which is down on nearly 1 percentage point in comparison to the quarters before.
And look at that. There's a big green jump here.
Yeah. We have seen a higher issuance activity in ESG-related, senior non-pref in the fourth quarter, but you see the big picture for the whole year is also that around 1/3 of the issuance is ESG-related.
Well, one thing that we don't see in these tables is, of course, secondary market performance.
Yeah.
And the thing that I get from our traders, at least, is while covereds really suffered all year long from widening spreads, which doesn't really bode very well for secondary market performance, in the senior market, that actually hasn't quite happened as strongly. Yeah. So people had fun buying bonds and holding them and went quite killed by the aftermarket performance. Also, if I'm correct, we had much more tightening in these markets in the primaries without losing half of the order book, which was a danger at some stage during the covered bond market. Yeah. You couldn't really tighten anything without risking a big part of the order book. So what about the senior market? Sorry, the SSA market?
Yeah, the SSA, the market is influenced especially by the strong issuer European Union. That also mirrors in the average order books, which were around 10 billion, very good book-to-cover ratios. So the market segment is and was last year extremely attractive for investors. That mirrors a huge demand there.
Well, I mean, what you could say about the SSA dynamics is also they were the bad boys or bad girls or the bad people behind the misperformance of the coverts, right? Because you mentioned before Bund swap spread, Euro coverts versus SSA. Where are we right there now? Has that normalized a little bit?
It has normalized in terms of the SSA covered bond relation, where we have again a pickup from coverts versus SSA. It was a little bit different, especially end of the third, beginning of the fourth quarter, where covered bonds were trading through SSAs, which made them less attractive. That has normalized, but Bund swap, of course, has not normalized. We're trading around flat on the long-term average.
So normally I would now expect your key liquidity drivers for the next year. I understand we don't have it this year because everything is changing dramatically and we don't want to put focus on single factors. But let's hear it anyway. So what do we think is going to await us for 2025, especially in coverts?
So overall, we have two big elephants in the room. The first one is politics with a new US and old US president and with election, among others, in Germany. The other one is inflation, where we have now discussion if the Fed is maybe at the end of a cycle and beginning of a new one, and maybe inflation is picking up like in the 70s. So we have a lot of unknowns for 25. Nevertheless, we think that we have another constructive year in covered bond issuance with roughly 170 billion in issuance activity for covered bonds. When it comes to seniors, we expect a little bit more focus next year on senior prefs than on senior non-pref. And that's because the regulatory needs in 25 is less than it was in 24. So more focus on senior pref. And the SSA issuance volume will be highly influenced, of course, by issuance activity of the European Union.
Yeah, I think the big factor that we don't have on here, what that's really needed is growth. Growth in the Eurozone market, not only there, but especially there, growth in France, growth in Germany, as the locomotives now here for the European Union. And well, we get the odd new prime minister in France. We may get a new chancellor or not in the next month in Germany. Big chances to be taken. And of course, the biggest change would be if the war in Ukraine ends. That should be a big boost to growth. So let's hope for the best here. Thank you very much for your attendance. Thank you very much, Matthias, for your insights.
It's a pleasure.
I hope we see you back, or you see us back in the next quarter. Best regards from Frankfurt. I'm Thomas. This is Matthias. Have a good year.